My name is Michelle. I'm standing in the county courthouse, the air thick with tension. The judge has just taken her seat, and the room falls silent. I feel the cool tick of my grandmother's watch against my wrist, a reminder of the long-awaited moment. As I look around, I see the faces of those who have been part of this long, drawn-out drama. 2 members of the hospital board are here, looking uncomfortable, as if they know they've believed the wrong thing. Several women from the church circle sit in the rows, the same ones who nodded along to the lies about me for years. In the second row, rigid and pale, is Mrs. Thompson, my ex-mother-in-law. Beside her lawyer, my ex-husband, Ethan, is sweating in a suit that no longer fits him right. And near the back, my former best friend, Lily, is holding herself very still, with a quiet man named Ryan sitting 2 rows behind her. I remember the day, a year after my divorce, when I was finishing a shift near the maternity ward. I was handing off a chart to a night nurse named Jake. The maternity wing was just 1 hallway over from the emergency department where I worked. I'd cut through it countless times without a second thought. Suddenly, I saw Mrs. Thompson. She had a way of smiling that made me feel like I was being shut out. She walked up to me, smug as can be, and said, loud enough for the nurses to hear, "Leaving you was the best decision Ethan ever made. Now he has a baby boy with your best friend." 6 years of being called the broken one came crashing down on me in that single breath. But I didn't flinch. I just looked at her, calm as a flatline, and said, "Is that what you believe?" I grew up in a coastal town. My father was a fisherman, a hard-working man whose hands were rough from years of handling nets. My mother was a schoolteacher, gentle and kind, but also firm. I worked my way through college and medical school, taking on odd jobs to pay the bills. I learned to keep my head down and let my work speak for itself. I believed that if I did good work quietly, the truth would sort itself out. This philosophy served me well in the trauma bay. I could stitch up strangers at 3 o'clock in the morning without my hands shaking. The smell of the hospital, that clean cotton and antiseptic smell, used to be my haven. It was the one place where no one ever called me broken. I met Ethan when I was 26. He was charming, with a way of making strangers feel special. We got married, and we both wanted children. But as the years passed, nothing happened. After about 2 years, I suggested we both get tested. Ethan refused. He laughed it off at first, then got defensive. He said Thompson men didn't have those problems and that we should leave it in God's hands. I pushed a few times, but then I let it go. I still believed that silence was a kind of patience. I went and got tested by myself, and my results came back completely normal. I sat in my car in the clinic lot, relieved but also confused. If it wasn't me, then what was it? Ethan started whispering to his mother that maybe the problem was me. Mrs. Thompson ran the women's circle at her church like a dictator. She'd lost her husband young and raised Ethan alone. She saw him as her proof of success. So, when Ethan told her the trouble was probably me, she didn't question it. It started with small things, a sympathetic sigh at a potluck, a hand on someone's arm. Then it got worse. At a church supper, she introduced me to a visiting pastor's wife with a look of pity. "This is Michelle," she said. "My daughter-in-law. She's a doctor, you know. Such a shame about the children." I didn't say anything to Ethan that night. I was still waiting for the truth to come out. Lily had been my best friend since high school. We met in a biology class and stayed close through all the ups and downs. When the church talk started getting to me, she was the one I leaned on. She'd come over with wine and let me vent, but looking back, every word she said had a hidden meaning. One Tuesday, I came home from a shift to find a manila envelope on the kitchen counter and Ethan's closet half empty. He'd filed for divorce without even telling me in person. By the weekend, he'd moved in with Lily, and the story was already out. I was cold, married to my job, and couldn't give him children. Mrs. Thompson made sure everyone in the church heard it, and Lily said nothing to correct it. I didn't fight back. I thought fighting would prove them right. I went to work the next morning and set a teenager's broken arm, and that felt like the only real thing I did all week. But then, the hospital board got involved. I'd been in line for years to lead the emergency department. I'd built the trauma protocols that half the county used. But the whispers reached the credentialing committee. They said my personal life was unstable, and there were questions about my judgment. When the position was given to someone else, I knew it was because of the lies. That night, I sat in my car in the hospital lot and realized that the silence I'd been so proud of had a price. A nurse I trusted gave me the name of a lawyer named Miss Harris. Her office was above a bookstore, and she had a way of looking at me like she could see into my soul. I told her everything: the marriage, the church talk, the lost job. She listened without interrupting and then said, "What you're describing might be defamation. But it's hard. To win, we'd have to prove 3 things: a specific false statement was made, it was spread to others, and it caused you real, measurable harm." I knew I had the harm part covered. A lost promotion and a salary difference were real numbers. But the false part? That meant fighting in public. They'd say the statement was true, that I really couldn't have children. I almost walked away. The thought of the town dissecting me was too much. But Miss Harris said, "Silence isn't a virtue when it's costing you your career. Sometimes, you have to make them prove what they're saying." I spent 2 weeks thinking about it. I wrote down everything I stood to lose: my standing in the town, the way people would talk. But then I wrote down what I stood to gain: my name, my work, the truth. I called Miss Harris on a Monday morning before my shift and told her I was in. She said, "Good. Then let's make them say it under oath." Ms. Harris drafted the complaint over the next few weeks. It named the specific statements, the dates, and the witnesses. When it was filed, the news spread through town like wildfire. "Michelle is suing the Thompsons." Mrs. Thompson was furious. She told the women's circle I'd become vengeful and godless. Ethan and Lily stayed quiet at first, but I started getting messages. Some were cruel, some were curious, and a few were supportive. Ms. Harris told me the next step was the other side's response. They had 2 options: say the comments were just opinion, or claim they were true. I asked her why she hoped they'd choose the second option. She smiled and said, "Because then they have to prove it. And to prove it, they have to open a door." They took the second road. Ethan's lawyer filed a response claiming that the statements about me weren't defamation because they were true. I really was the reason the marriage produced no children. Ms. Harris called to tell me, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. They just said the magic words. But they didn't think it through. To prove you were the infertile one, they'd have to put both of your medical records in front of a court. That night, I couldn't sleep. I started thinking about a day, 7 years ago, when Ethan drove to the city alone for a routine physical. He came home different, quiet and short-tempered. After that day, he never mentioned getting tested again, and the whispers about me began. I told Miss Harris about that day. She said it was a reason to ask the right question. She filed a motion to compel the production of Ethan's relevant medical records. His lawyer fought it hard, arguing privacy and relevance. I had to sit with the not knowing, which was torture for me. I went back to work, setting bones and reading scans, trying not to think about the folder in the city clinic's archive. Before the judge would rule on the motion, Miss Harris needed me to sign a verified complaint. I read every line, seeing my quiet years of humiliation laid out in numbered paragraphs. It made the lie look so flimsy. I signed the complaint, feeling a sense of determination. The machine to find the truth was now running. The ruling came on a gray afternoon. Ms. Harris called, and I stepped into the supply closet to take the call. The judge granted it, with limits, she said. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 7 years. I later learned that Ethan's lawyer asked for a private meeting, and Mrs. Thompson called Miss Harris's office twice. The first sign that something was wrong on their end came from Lily. She texted me out of the blue after a year of silence, "Please don't do this. Think about the baby." I read it 3 times. It didn't make sense. The lawsuit was between me, Ethan, and Mrs. Thompson. Why would Lily, who'd supposedly won everything, be so afraid? The folder came 8 days later. Ms. Harris called me to her office. She slid a single sheet toward me, the rest blacked out under the court seal. The diagnosis was azoospermia, no measurable sperm. Ethan had known for 7 years that he couldn't father a child. And he'd let an entire town believe it was my fault. I drove home, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. I realized that the baby Ethan was parading around couldn't be his. Lily's midnight text suddenly made sense. She was afraid of what a courtroom full of medical records might reveal. I called Miss Harris and told her I thought there was more to the story. She said, "Let the court find it." And then, on that fateful day in the hospital, Ryan walked in. He was the man Lily had been involved with before she chose Ethan. He'd been led to believe their relationship was more serious. When he stepped through the door, Lily's face went pale. Now, in the courtroom, Miss Harris starts her case. She doesn't raise her voice. She builds her argument 1 point at a time, calm and methodical. She establishes the false statements, the harm I've suffered, and then addresses the defense's claim that the infertility was mine. She asks the court to consider Ethan's medical records. As the necessary line is read that Ethan was diagnosed with a condition making fathering a biological child impossible, the room changes temperature. The churchwomen turn to look at Mrs. Thompson, who has gone white as a sheet. Ms. Harris then lays out the contradiction. The defense had sworn the empty marriage was my fault, but the record said it was Ethan's. And there was a baby boy. That's when Ethan stands up, his voice cracking. "That's not. You can't." The judge tells him to sit. Mrs.